We are now through the postseason for Nebraska football. They wrap things up with a 20-15 win in the Pinstripe Bowl over Boston College. What just stood out to you about Nebraska in that game, Bryan, the 5-point win for the Huskers in the Bronx?
Young guys. I mean, I think you have to go ahead and bring up the young guys that had an impact. Donovan Jones, Shavers, Lenhart. Mine is going blank here a little
McGahee,
bit. Yes.
Benning a little bit.
I thought Van Poppel played pretty well when he was in there. Quite silently, kind of a little bit more like a Jordan Ochoa, played pretty well too for a walk-on guy a year ago. I think that there's a little bit more there than what people are kind of suspecting that there is, number one. I think that maybe when you see that, you have to go back and kind of give credit back to Rule and his staff, like how they've managed their practices and how they're developing depth. Even during those redshirt seasons, that was always that's something to kind of take away there. I think that Nebraska has a lot of things to work with. I mean, they do have some pieces that they're going to have to go ahead and fill in when it comes to the offensive line. I think we'll talk about Portal here in a little bit. I think that Ty Robinson, I think, cemented himself to me as being kind of a steal. Like, I don't know if he's going to get into the second, but if he's a third, fourth guy, he's a absolute steal. The most pressures by any defensive lineman so far this bowl season. So that tells me a lot. I mean, that guy, I mean, it tells you a lot too about a guy that's just, this is it. He's hanging it up after this point, and he's going to go out there and have a very successful last game, and lead basically the nation in quarterback hurries. So, and quarterback pressure. So I felt like that he played like what you would kind of expect him to, and I think he's played himself into a little bit better standing, as he looks at the NFL draft.
And maybe the most important thing that Ty Robinson and Nash Hutmacher alongside him did was, yes, help Nebraska back to a winning record for the first time since 2016. But something that Ty and Nash weren't afforded, Bryan, was a lot of time to develop. A 6th year for Ty Robinson, a 5th for Nash Hutmacher, and then you get the emergence of a guy like a Keona Davis or Jordan Ochoa in the bowl game. Riley Van Poppel has the opportunity to redshirt. More so than even just 7 wins and a winning record this season, I think that the true benefit of Ty Robinson and Nash Hutmacher coming back will be felt in the next few years because those young defensive linemen weren't forced onto the field early like Ty and Nash were.
I think that there's a lot of truth to that. I mean, but that's kind of that organic development way that I think people, I think that's where people think like the way that the cycle should work is like, yeah, the portal out is always going to be there. It's always going to impact you, but typically there should be enough people that are basically, in the pipeline, sitting in the room to where that most of that can be absorbed. And then you can go into the portal. However, when you do find that need for a starter, need for depth, it's like Davia, bringing him in as a quarterback. He's not being brought in to replace Raiola next year, but they have a hole in the room. They have a hole in the depth chart, so they can go out there and get a guy that Holgerson is familiar with and bring him in there and sit him in the room and say, you two will, work against one another and looking forward to having a competitive, spirited kind of, relationship there in the room. And then you bring in a guy like Latif as well. So I think that that's the way that everybody kind of envisions it working. But yeah, I think that, when you start talking about the way you broke it down, you start to think about just how the organic way of development really kind of comes through. And that's where I think you give credit back to the coaching staff and how they're managing those practices throughout the season.
You mentioned another name in Donovan Jones, a guy I remember talking to you about when Nebraska got his commitment. For people who might have forgotten about Donovan Jones, what did Nebraska like about him, and what did you see from him in the bowl game against Boston College?
I think that there's length. I think that there's a natural instinct playing in the secondary. I think there's a physicality, when it came to how he plays the game. I think that there's a lot of things really there to like, where you could talk about him as playing, multiple spots too. There's a versatility there. Right? He could play a boundary. He could roll back to play rover. He could play free. He could do a lot of different things. I think that's because he has that athleticism, that length, that ability to kind of change things around a little bit. He doesn't have to come off of the field basically to based on whatever package or personnel that they're facing, that he can just stay on the field and roll to a different spot.
You mentioned offense as well. Let's switch sides of the ball. Couple big gaping holes on that offensive line. Ben Scott gone, Bryce Benhart gone after 60 games played. I think 54 starts for him. What's it looking like for Nebraska behind those two guys heading into 2025, whether it's on the roster, in recruiting, or the portal?
Yeah, and that's like the interesting part, because as we would have ended last season, or as we would have kind of developed, the list as we went through last season, I think you and I would have talked to one another. We would have said offensive tackle is going to be a critical need.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe even a Ben Scott replacement, some sort of an interior offensive lineman that has experience, snapping the football. That'd be pretty huge too. So Nebraska did host, a couple of offensive linemen already this season, or through the portal. Isaiah World, Dominic Giedis, the kid that committed to Missouri. There's one other guy in there. Oh, the big one from Washington State,
yeah.
Famo. And he has not committed anywhere yet. Nebraska still could be in the picture for him, and that could be potentially a big time guy. But is he a right tackle? Is he really an interior offensive lineman? I think time will kind of tell there. I think this is a position that we're going to see a board develop. I think that you're going to see some players now that are kind of wrapping up their FCS run. They're going to go ahead and declare, put themselves into the portal. I think that you're going to see some of the teams that are wrapping up their bowl season, and as the CFP playoffs kind of wrap up, I think that there's going to be guys that jump into the portal from there. I mean, Nebraska can start hosting guys as soon as January 1st, and they do have a defensive lineman coming in the third already that we know about, TJ Lindsey. That came out originally out of IMG and went to Auburn as part of the 2024 class. So this could be a really nice pickup as well for Nebraska, kind of a 6'3", 270, interior guy. But Nebraska needs 2, if not 3, portal guys, I think, on the offensive line to kind of feel good about what they've got going into spring.
We're talking with Bryan Munson of Husker Online here on our Allo Fiber VIP line. And Bryan, offensive line, unlike, say, the skill positions or the defensive backfield, not exactly easy to come by. That's one of those developmental positions I think we've seen, and the guys that do get in the portal usually command a bit of a pretty penny. What does the bowl game do on national TV, if anything, for Nebraska in trying to add, upper level talent through the transfer portal?
Well, I think obviously, Nebraska was one of those energetic teams. I think that there was a lot. There was some hype. You got put on there against a Boston College team, so a big market team. A Bill O'Brien guy. You have kind of that young quarterback, some flashy offense stuff kind of going on. You had the consistency still that remained, I think, from as you transition from White to Butler when it comes to the defense. So there's a consistency that remained there, and as well as the optimism that kind of goes along with it on the offensive side of the football. So I think right now it's really like a good looking situation. And I think also underlying to it is just the youth that is there, that are being productive on that team. When you start talking about, Barney and Raiola, and you start talking about like a Quentin Ives who got into the football game. I think what that's always kind of proven to people is that, you don't have to sit in a room for 4 years before you see the field. If you can come in and be productive and get ready, that's kind of rules path. They'll find a way to get you on the football field if you can come in and get ready. So I think that's always been kind of like the number one mission statement for those guys when it comes to recruiting. They want to let those guys know you don't have to come here and wait it out. If you can produce, we're going to find a way to get you on the football field.
I'm sure I've asked you this before, but I think it's worth bringing up again because the bowl game did mean a lot to Nebraska, not the biggest one on the national stage, but you see the emotion from the players, especially Dylan Raiola after the game. It looks like, Nebraska is ascending, right? They have the Matt Rule year 3 bump coming up, or at least Husker fans hope. Does the message of we need you to come in and complete our room sell, or is it more, hey, look what we're building. We have a lot of pieces. You're going to fit in and be one of the guys, a useful piece of guy we really want, but the world's not on your shoulders. Does one of those messages sell better to guys in the portal than others?
Well, I think it depends on which end you are. I mean, when you start talking about, if you compare a couple guys like that Nebraska has gotten like out of the portal, I think that's maybe where I would go ahead and start. Like a Williams Nowerney, like for an example, you start talking about a 5-star plus guy out of high school a year ago. I think what you're doing there with him, obviously, is that you're showing him that there's a path, just basically, and his name can be penciled at the top of the depth chart. I think, though, when you start to kind of like you scan down and you say we have lost these many players in the room, and that is a larger number than the number of starters that we have basically along those positions, like a guy like Gabe Moore, who's been out of football for 2 years. Right, he's transferring in from Mississippi State. He's got nice size. He's a good enough athlete. Like watching him out of high school was kind of interesting because he was really more of an outside edge linebacker. But now he's a 6'4", 290-pound guy that you're going to see like putting him into a 5 or a 4-eye playing defensive end. That maybe has the potential to kind of grow into somebody that can kind of slide down and play into a 3. So I think you have to kind of teach him or tell him and sell it to him a little bit differently. It's more like, we don't have a guy like you on the team. We think that, you can add a lot of value here. However, you're going to have to come in here and kind of show us like what you can do like for us. It's a different pitch that way. And I think from that, it's like, we don't have that 4-eye 5 guy. You would come in here and sit in that chair. We don't know exactly how many times we're going to need to call upon it, but you could potentially, add some of the things to your, to the toolbox for us. And really you are going to be a depth guy, maybe a special teams guy to start out with as we kind of increase your role. So very different approach, I think, with those guys, but you're able to kind of still show them a path into the playing time, which obviously they weren't getting where they came from. I mean, Williams Nowerney played less than 40 snaps last year at Missouri.
Yeah.
I mean, he could walk into a very prominent role on Nebraska's defense next year.
Is that a good place for Nebraska to be, that they might have a guy that they can plug and play, or is it a little scary getting a guy with that much experience that's going to be relied on so heavily potentially?
I think that people, there's good and there's bad, right? You should expect that he is a very talented individual, but I think the thing that goes along with Nowerney is he's a little raw. And I think that people should expect some growing pains, I think, in those particular cases. But when you get a chance to put these guys into an entire spring and you play along, developing chemistry, not just along the defensive line, but as a defense as a whole, you can cover some of that up. And some of those things are teachable moments also in the springs. But that spring is going to be so critical for those positions to kind of come together. They're going to be really molding a bunch of players together during the spring, and it's going to be a very valuable one for sure for those guys to kind of go through together.
2 more for you then, Bryan. You mentioned special teams, the elephant in the room. Still special teams, not exactly better. As you look at Nebraska on special teams, is Nebraska holding back, maybe putting some more developmental guys out there and not focusing on special teams? Is it guys just not making plays that they're capable of? Is it coaching and scheme? Why is Nebraska still struggling on special teams?
Yeah, well, I don't think we should overlook the answer that Matt Rule, or the comment that Matt Rule gave at the end of the game. And that was that, everything is going to get rebuilt basically on the special team side of the football. I think he knows that it's costing them football games. I think we can think of 1 or 2 anyway that I think it directly, probably impacted the game, that where they could have probably turned a loss into a dub. And I think they are some guys short. I mean, they went out there and they got a punter, which I don't think, wasn't really the thing against Paschini. I think to go back there and have blocks. I think he was a very consistent guy when he was punting. So you had to go get Jack McAllister, but you did have some snapping problems. So you go out there and you get a Kevin Galick from New Hampshire. But then I think it does come down to scheme. Then I think it does come down to coaching. Maybe there's a review about, hey, how important is this? And do we have this prioritized well enough within our kind of periods of a practice to where we're all together as a team going through this, as a group? So I think that, you got to go back to, your framework of your coordinator, to your analysts, to figuring out like the people that are available to do what, to put the best possible people on the football field, basically to make sure that that's not the Achilles heel for the team. And then really try to go back out there and rebuild this whole thing. Cause I think it could be a combination of a lot of things. It could be that, like what you had said, holding something back. I think that there's some schematics to it. I think there's just like not blocking properly, not knowing where to kind of go with guys. And I think obviously that when you get down to it, like where you get the bad snaps, those guys have got to be ready to go, and they've got to be perfected their craft. And Gaelic, as you'd seen on his social media, he works extremely hard at that stuff.
Last one then for you, Bryan, in terms of the actual recruiting, whether it's out of the portal, whether it's some high school guys that are still on the board, month away from National Signing Day, first week in February, anything on your radar that you're tracking that Nebraska is involved with?
Yeah, not a lot like with the 2025s that I think I would be overly concerned with as we kind of move into that, like you said, into February. But I think there's a couple of guys of note that people need to maybe pay attention to. You got James Dunnigan, who goes by JJ Dunnigan, the cornerback out of Manhattan, Kansas. He's going to be making a commitment here, I think, later this week. I think it was like January 2nd or January 3rd. And you had Hunter Higgins. Hunter Higgins, the big defensive lineman from Manhattan, I think it's Mays South. I don't have his high school like right in front of me. But he visited Nebraska 5 times this last year. The Huskers did a great job of bringing in a ton of 2026 guys. They've got to close these players that visited Nebraska multiple times, and particularly the boundary border state guys. Like these are really critical to their entire plan. So Nebraska can get off on the right step right away with the 2026 group with Dunnigan and Higgins. But I would say right now, I think Nebraska is running a close second with both of them. So some ground to make up with both those guys.
We will certainly track it. I know I will be tracking it by following along with what Bryan writes at Husker Online and on Twitter at Bryan Munson _. Bryan, as always, appreciate your insight. Appreciate everything you do for us here during On the Block. We'll talk to you next year officially.
Happy New Year to you and your listeners, man. We'll talk to you soon.